No MMO is perfect, but all of the MMOs on this list today have something for someone. They all do something better than everyone else, and I'll try to highlight that thing, that pillar that MMO can point to and say, this is our thing. We do this better. So let's dive into the best MMOs today and talk about what each one offers and why they are worth playing in 2022, so that you can choose the next MMO to sink hundreds of hours into. This list is in no particular order. All 10 of these MMOs are worth playing, and depending on your taste, one of these might be the perfect MMO for you. Be sure to let me know down in the comments below if there's one you're playing right now that you think absolutely deserves a spot on this list. First up, Lost Ark. Lost Ark comes complete with a ton of your Eastern MMO tropes. The characters are beautiful and hypersexualized. The weapons are gloriously large. The progression system is chock full of RNG. And of course, the cash shop. It's loaded with currencies and purchases that you can use to advance your character quicker. Despite these tropes, Lost Ark's launch has been a massive success here in the West, where players that typically wouldn't overlook these things have chosen to do so because the game is both incredibly well made and simply a ton of fun. Lost Ark is a top-down MMO that will remind many players of Diablo 2 or Path of Exile. However, that's where the similarities end. Lost Ark is a game that has systems within systems. It has more currencies than you can shake a stick at, and these will serve to be a completionist's dream. There is a lot of depth to those 100 different forms of long-term progression that ultimately are the reason this ARPG is an MMO. In addition to that, it has dungeons and raids, just as you would expect from an MMO. So don't let the top-down view fool you. A lot of these systems are unique, and a lot of them will feel very familiar. For example, Guardian raids are literally hunts from Monster Hunter. Soulfist is literally Goku from DBZ. Add to that a base building simulator and a dash of ocean exploration, and you have Lost Ark. It's like Smilegate wrote all of the most fun things they could think of on a piece of paper and then figured out how to make them all fit into one game. And thanks to the fact that the game was released a few years earlier in the East, its first year in the West is feeling very polished and full of endgame content, two things MMO launches never have. The ultimate goal in Lost Ark is to sail around the game and collect all of the things while pushing your item level higher and higher to unlock more and more content in the game. Where the game really shines is in its boss fights. The boss combat in group content is exciting and mechanic heavy. It does not feature the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS, but it does have a class that acts sort of as a tank, and it does have two other classes that feel sort of like supports. If you want a free-to-play MMO where you're often fighting not one enemy at a time, but 20 enemies at a time, Lost Ark could be the perfect MMO for you. Next on the list is Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 launched in 2012 and has since been one of the most popular MMOs on the market. It features 9 different classes with different subclasses built into them and is free to play the core game, which includes all of the base game zones and the main story and 80 levels of progression. The expansions are buy once and play forever with no subscription necessary. It doesn't even have one of those optional subscriptions, you know, the ones that are usually anything but optional if you really want to play and enjoy the game. A couple of the games on this list are guilty of having a not so optional sub, but Guild Wars 2 in fact doesn't have a sub at all. It has differentiated itself from the rest of the MMOs through its use of horizontal progression and its very loose reliance on the Holy Trinity, but most of all, mounts. What Guild Wars 2 does better than any other MMO I've played, including MMOs on this list, is the journey from A to B. In that, I mean, every MMO makes you run to and from objectives, and in Guild Wars 2, that journey is not just breathtaking, but it's fun. This is all thanks to the best in slot mount system and its use of gliders. I don't know how to describe the mounts in a way that does them justice. They just have weight to them, and it feels like you're steering a large beast when you're riding a large beast. It feels like the thing under you weighs 1,000 pounds, but it achieves this while still feeling like it has the agility of a cheetah. In addition to this, Guild Wars 2 mounts have special functions. Some move really fast, some jump really high, some work in water, and some sort of fly. And all of them have mastery trees that allow you to level them up and make them better. But warning, once you've ridden mounts in Guild Wars 2, every other MMO's mounts, their animations, their feel might feel a little pale in comparison. The gliders in the game experience the same tender, loving care, with the ability to unlock new passives for them as you train train them, ultimately allowing you to do things like catch updrafts and glide for longer distances. And it's entirely thanks to these mounts and these gliders that the zone design in Guild Wars 2 is also one of the best, easily competing with Final Fantasy XIV and WoW in terms of their size and their scope and their verticality. Zones will span all the way from high into the canopies to deep down into the roots and caves beneath, and the expansion zones are just jaw-droppingly gorgeous. And this is where Guild Wars 2 really shines, in my opinion. It is in the exploration of these zones, the journey and the quest to check off all the items in each zone to unlock all of the mounts. It is easy to get lost in Guild Wars 2, and it is free to try it out. The game's 9 unique classes have multiple elite specs, which are basically subclasses for each class. So you have a ton of build options and many opportunities to play your way. And thanks to the horizontal progression, once you hit 80 and get your gear, you'll always be able to come back and do any piece of content in the game that they add, regardless of how long you've been away. This year, Guild Wars 2 had a giant new expansion, one of its biggest ever, adding new types of mounts, new subclasses for each class, new maps, and a new guild hall, and fishing. The endgame is completionism and the pursuit of unlocking fashion. If you fancy the idea of base jumping off of a canopy and opening your glider to descend down onto an enemy and hurl fireballs or greatswords at them, you'll probably love Guild Wars 2. With its community currently hyped for its biggest expansion in years, now is a great time to jump in. Next on the list is Elder Scrolls Online. Elder Scrolls Online is an MMO from ZeniMax Online Studios that experienced a very rocky launch in 2014. At launch, there were only 4 classes, no raids, and opposing factions couldn't see each other, let alone play together. Literally, if you went to the enemy city, you couldn't see the players there. It was a ghost town. Fortunately, ZeniMax heard the feedback loud and clear and turned the game around. Since its launch, it has added 2 more classes, bringing the total to 6. It added raids, and it added a ton of fantastic dungeons, which are arguably some of the game's best content. As a result of these changes today, the game is incredibly well received by its community. But perhaps what ESO does better than any MMO presently out is its strict adherence to having every single piece of dialogue in the game voice acted, and its quality voice acting. I mean, just look at the names on this list: Kate Beckinsale, John Cleese, and the list goes on. ESO heavily benefits from standing on the shoulders of the insanely popular Elder Scrolls franchise, and it has very effectively utilized the fantastic lore of that franchise to come up with a unique and compelling story for players to experience as they adventure through Tamriel. But this is not Skyrim Online. Expecting it to be that will leave you disappointed. It is an MMO that takes place in the world of Tamriel, and at times even the lands of Skyrim, but it is an MMO. Although it is an MMO that's primary focus is casual solo content. Elder Scrolls Online is a buy-to-play MMO with an optional sub. That optional sub is very worth it, to say the least, as you will not have access to half of the game's zones, half of the game's dungeons, and nearly all of the game's raids if you don't have said sub. You can buy these piecemeal, but it will cost a small fortune, and the sub comes with loads of other worthwhile benefits, making it a great deal, if not mandatory, for enjoying the entire game. On the bright side, if you are sub-averse, you still have hundreds of hours of content to explore in the base game before needing to purchase one of the quarterly DLCs. Elder Scrolls Combat is perhaps its most contentious topic. Tab targeting enthusiasts from games like WoW and Final Fantasy will feel a little bit out of place in ESO until they get used to the action combat, but once they do, it can be incredibly satisfying. Mounts are almost exclusively obtained by gambling for them in loot crates, which will likely cost you between $500 and $1,000 for the desirable mounts. While its mount system is less than ideal for would-be mount collectors, it does have an incredibly impressive number of gear cosmetics for you to collect and apply to the armor you're wearing. Many of these armor cosmetics can be earned in-game and drop from quests, dungeons, and raids throughout the game. ESO's outfit station is one of the best cosmetic systems in any MMO I've played. It's organized and insanely customizable. You can unlock hundreds of looks for every piece of equipment, from your belt to your breastplate to your weapons, and it's definitely one of the MMOs that raises the bar for customizing your character's appearance. Heck, you can even change your character's skin and the personality of your character, which then affects how it stands when it's idling and more. In recent years, ESO has made a concerted effort to appeal to the more casual MMO audience, going as far as trying to distance themselves from actually being called an MMO. This shift in focus was more visible than ever when they announced that their major addition to ESO for 2022's expansion, known as High Isle, would be a card game. Personally, I'm not really thrilled about their decision to focus on a card game for the year of 2022, but I am excited to explore the beautiful new zone that it's coming with. If you enjoy Elder Scrolls lore, if you enjoy casual friendly overland content or card games, or one of the best outfit stations in any MMO, ESO might be the MMO for you to try this year. Finally, Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV launched in 2010, and this launch was such a disaster that in 2012 the developers themselves had a live event where they nuked the world and had everyone watch while they did it. Perhaps it was cathartic for all involved. They then shut the game down. Think about that. It was so poorly received, the developers said, look, you don't have to burn this game to the ground, we're gonna do it ourselves and you're gonna watch. They would relaunch the game the next year in 2013 as A Realm Reborn, and this time the game would go on to become the most profitable Final Fantasy game ever. Final Fantasy XIV is definitely one of the standout MMOs. You can just tell this game's player base and therefore its budget is on another level compared to many of the other MMOs on this list. They have their own orchestra composing unique tracks for every little piece of the game. Each major expansion adds an astounding number of dungeons, trials, and raids, and 6 new zones. And this time around, 2 new classes. Each trial and raid is a visual spectacle with stage transformations, boss transformations, and more. Love or hate Final Fantasy, you can't deny that this game is massive, and the massive amount of money it makes is being poured back into it. Its expansions are on another level and of a scale we wish every MMO's expansions could match. Speaking of, they just launched their most successful expansion ever, Endwalker. Final Fantasy XIV's strongest feature is its story. It has one overarching story that has continued for the last 10 years, and it is absolutely amazing. It starts off as a slow burn, and it might be difficult going through the base game content, especially Urianger's dialogue. If you know, you know. Personally, I enjoyed the base game, and if you survive it, you'll almost certainly enjoy everything after it. It weaves every dungeon and trial and raid into the story and uses cutscenes to deliver jaw-dropping plot revelations. Final Fantasy XIV is an RPG first and an MMO second. You will spend a lot of time solo questing your way through the game to unlock one piece of group content at a time. Depending on you and how much you enjoy doing solo content in an MMO, this could be amazing or it could be incredibly frustrating. I will say that the story in Final Fantasy XIV was so good that I enjoyed the solo content in Final Fantasy much more than I typically do in MMOs. Also worth noting is that the base game has pages upon pages of dialogue boxes that you'll need to read to get through the story, and you'll rightfully notice that the ratio of combat to dialogue in Final Fantasy is 95% dialogue and 5% combat while going through the main story quests. Fortunately, later on there are a lot more cutscenes rather than dialogue boxes you have to read, but still the ratio of dialogue to combat is heavily skewed toward the side of dialogue. The main story quest is first and foremost about the story, and it's a damn good story. Another thing that Final Fantasy does better than almost any other game is its earnable cosmetics. The coolest weapon cosmetics in the game, you earn them. You don't buy them in the cash shop. The coolest mounts, you earn those as well. In fact, the cash shop is so separated from the game, you actually have to close the game and visit a website to interact with it. In all of my time in Final Fantasy, I have never once felt the need to visit the cash shop. There were far too many amazing cosmetics I still needed to unlock while playing the game, and I never felt like I needed to buy one. This is all made possible by the fact that Final Fantasy XIV is a buy-to-play MMO with a mandatory sub, though it does allow you to play the first 60 levels for free so that you can try it out extensively before spending a dime. The free trial does have some restrictions to prevent gold sellers from abusing the trial, but it's still an incredibly generous free trial. If you like to earn your cosmetics and your mounts rather than buy them in the cash shop, if you don't mind paying for a sub, and if you want one of the highest quality MMO story experiences around, Final Fantasy XIV might be the game for you. New World. New World is a delicate one. I'm going to put this one on the list, and I can already hear the keyboard warriors typing their furious replies, and that's fair. New World's launch was far from perfect, and so I recommend New World, but under one condition: that you recognize you're jumping in before it's had its chance to have its redemption arc, and I do believe it can absolutely have its redemption arc. It has the financing, and the devs seem to have the desire. New World is ESO and Final Fantasy before their redemption arc, before they transformed into the beloved and well-received MMOs they are today. It's in its infancy and not yet even a year old. So what did New World do right? New World is a beautiful, seamless, open world MMO without zones. In fact, it is the first MMO on the list where you can walk from one end of the world to the other without a single zone wall or load screen. It's surprising to me that WoW pulled this off in 2004, and none of the other MMOs on this list, save for New World, have aimed to achieve the same seamless world. New World is a buy-to-play MMO that launched in 2021 to massive hype, hitting nearly 1 million concurrent players on Steam. But those player numbers weren't long for this world. For the last 30 days, New World's average is presently down to 30,000 concurrent players, a far cry from where it was. I don't see that improving until their first major expansion. You know, the one where they add a lot of new quests and at least one new zone of content for the PvEers who love the game until they ran out of things to do. They need an expansion that is actually big enough to get everyone that stepped away to come back and to see what has changed, and most importantly, one that has resolved enough of the deficiencies to get them to stay when they come back. So why do I have New World on this list? Because I genuinely enjoyed it for about 300 hours. I usually spend $60 on single player games that I enjoy for 40 to 80 hours. So spending $39 on an MMO that I enjoyed for 300 hours felt fine, especially since it's buy to play with no sub. When they add more, when they fix the issues the community was unsatisfied with, I can go back and drop another 300 hours on this beautiful world without paying a dime. Most importantly, it's unique. If you're burned out on the more typical MMO formula, this is something different, and it's something fun. And while the early experience is great, I'm banking on the rest of the experience being made great in the future. What are the biggest complaints in the community right now? Repetitive quests, the amount of friction for group content, the amount of friction for getting from A to B, and the amount of friction for storage and inventory space. And Amazon Game Studios just announced that they're going to do away with all of those problems. They admitted that all of those problems are relics of an earlier iteration of the game, and it seems they realize now that some of those survival elements that stuck around shouldn't have. So if the idea of exploring a beautiful and dangerous island after washing up on a shore with nothing to your name but the shirt on your back sounds fun, if one of the deepest and most satisfying gathering and crafting systems in any MMO sounds fun, New World could be a great MMO for you to try. Just know that you're entering an MMO that hasn't had a chance to add the years of polish and endgame content that come with being a seasoned, decade-old MMO. It's not even had its first birthday yet. Runescape. Runescape is on the polar opposite end of the spectrum. Where New World was trying to redefine what an MMO could be, Runescape basks in what an MMO was. Ironically, there was a lot of Runescape to be found in New World's crafting and gathering systems, being that you could level literally anything you could think of by doing that thing. Runescape was originally released all the way back in 2001 as a browser game. I still remember my friend and I sitting next to each other on our lunch break in school, talking about how we needed to learn Java so that we could make the next RuneScape. It was staggeringly popular, but even more surprising than how popular it was 20 years ago is how popular it still is today. RuneScape is no longer a browser game. As of 2016, the browser version was mostly replaced by a standalone client. There are two major versions of RuneScape. One is the third iteration of RuneScape known as RuneScape 3. The other is old school RuneScape, which is basically RuneScape Classic. It's the 2007 version of RuneScape where updates are not added to the game unless voted for by the community. RuneScape boasted over 1.1 million paying subscribers in 2019, with many more playing the free version of the game. So what is RuneScape? It's fairly unique. You can level up literally anything by doing that thing. Want to level up mining? Mine. Want to level up magic? Use magic. Want to level up making campfires? You guessed it, make campfires. It's a classic take on the MMO genre and it's not ashamed of it. It embraces it fully and people love it for that. It's got tons of content, seeing that it's been around for ages, and it doesn't matter how awful your computer is, I'm betting it can run RuneScape. So if you're looking for the ultra classic MMO experience, or maybe you have a computer that can't handle modern MMOs, RuneScape could be the perfect MMO for you to try next. Next on the list is Star Wars: The Old Republic. Star Wars: The Old Republic launched in 2011, was developed by BioWare and published by EA. It is now a free-to-play MMO with an optional sub. However, that optional sub is less than optional if you want to fully enjoy the entire game. If you decide to play it, definitely consider picking up at least 1 month of the sub to unlock all of the areas, which once unlocked by your first month of subscription will stay unlocked forever. SWTOR, as it's affectionately called, is probably best known for its single-player class stories. The class stories are fully voice acted and are incredibly well fleshed out and well written. Perhaps the most unique part of these stories is that your choices actually have an impact on the ending of the story, with up to 3 different endings possible for your class. This is one of the coolest parts of SWTOR. A lot of MMOs let you make a decision when you're going through the dialogue, but most of the time that doesn't affect the outcome whatsoever. They are mostly cosmetic options for you to feel like you have a say in how your character is portrayed, but in SWTOR, the choices actually matter. The end of your story actually changes based based on the decisions you make. Also worth noting, SWTOR is the only game on the list that lets you wield a lightsaber. I'm just saying. The music in the game is straight Star Wars, so you'll recognize the sound and you'll definitely enjoy it if you typically enjoy Star Wars soundtracks. The game has a robust set of PvP and PvE modes for you to enjoy, which is nice because when does beating someone down with a lightsaber sound like a bad idea? It features 8 different classes, split 4 and 4 between the Jedi and the Sith factions, although 4 classes on one side will overlap a lot with 4 on the other side. The game is great for allowing you to play with friends as it will scale you down to the level of the zone you're in, which means if one person is behind, the other can go and help them while still getting great experience in the process. Speaking of questing content, it's very easy and you won't likely find a lot of challenges in it while you're leveling up. This means that if you're enjoying the story, you'll likely love the game, and if you don't enjoy the story, well, you probably won't, at least as far as the early game is concerned. It's also worth mentioning it features a lot of prominent characters from the Star Wars franchise, so if you're a fan of Star Wars, if you've got a craving for a sci-fi MMO, or if you're just looking for a great single-player story to get lost in, Star Wars: The Old Republic could be the next MMO for you. Next on the list is Destiny 2. If you're tired of bouncing from one fantasy MMO to the next and want something different, Destiny 2 is a AAA first-person shooter sci-fi MMO released by Bungie in 2017. Destiny is free to play, well, sort of. You have a very limited access to the Destiny content through the free version of the game, but if you want to enjoy all of the game, you will need to buy the expansions and perhaps even the season pass. This is a beautiful MMO that takes place on various planets and in space and features excellent gunplay mixed in with MMO-style gear progression, dungeons, and raids. Destiny 2 has 3 classes, each one has abilities and ultimates that you can choose between. Destiny 2's story experience is very short compared to the other MMOs on this list, but what is there is a ton of fun. Now for the game's most contentious topic. Unfortunately, the game vaults content, which can make Destiny's story confusing for new players. What is vaulting content, you might ask? Well, MMOs constantly add new content, making the game larger and giving you access to more and more content as it lives on. Destiny has made the unusual decision to vault content or remove it from the game, thereby removing your access to the content that you had once purchased. Understandably, players are not happy about having content they purchased be removed from the game, but Destiny insists it is necessary in order to add new content while also managing the total install size of the game. They are the only MMO that has felt it was necessary to do this, so I can't help but wonder how necessary it actually is. One thing Destiny can say that the other MMOs on this list can't is that it is cross-play. You can play with your friends regardless of the platform they are on. This is a fantastic feature that I wish more games had. As for the population, Destiny is one of the largest MMOs out today, boasting fantastic Steam numbers, which don't even include its console player base, which is also huge. If you want a beautiful space MMO with a variety of unique and powerful guns and something you can play with any of your friends regardless of the platform they're on, Destiny 2 might be the right choice for you. Next up, EVE Online. Speaking of sci-fi MMOs, let's talk about EVE Online. EVE Online is a space MMO originally released in 2003. While it's been out for a while, it's been constantly supported throughout its whole release, including just recently when they revamped their new player experience. EVE Online is free to play with the option to pay money to do things like access more of the spaceships sooner. EVE is possibly the most unique MMO on the list because in this MMO, you're not upgrading your character's armor, but instead you're building and upgrading your ship. To do this, you'll do everything from mining small asteroids to participating in massive fleet battles. You see, in EVE Online, players form their own alliances and then battle for control of the most valuable portions of the universe. When your ship is destroyed, it does not simply respawn. No, you must build it again, so the stakes are quite high in these battles. In fact, this game has made headlines multiple times for the unparalleled size of its massive space battles with thousands of players on either side. If you've ever wished for a game where you could build and upgrade epic spaceships and travel around the universe fighting other spaceships, EVE Online might be the game for you. And now for the final MMO on this list, Club Penguin. Okay, I'm just kidding. And last but not least is a game you've probably heard of. That game is World of Warcraft. It feels almost silly including World of Warcraft on here because, well, if you're looking for an MMO to play, you've almost certainly tried out World of Warcraft at some point, and you've definitely heard of it. But for that same reason, you can't make a list of the top 10 MMOs you should play without including this titan in the industry. Though I do wonder how much longer that will be the case. So let's do this. Who knows? Maybe you're a young adult, say almost 18 years old, and you weren't born yet when this game launched, and you have no idea what it is. World of Warcraft is a buy-to-play MMO with a required subscription that was released by Blizzard in 2004. It does not feel like it was 18 years ago I was playing the WoW beta. I got the invite from Blizzard in an email and promptly logged out of a Warcraft 3 custom Dota map and prepared for Blizzard's brand new unreleased MMO, World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft was, and to many still is, the gold standard for MMO content. It is by far the most successful MMO ever made, but it seems its reign is approaching its end as it has seen its player base decline year over year for quite some time now. Despite its recent decline, it's still one of, if not the biggest MMO available right now. So, what did WoW do so well? It made MMOs approachable when until then they really weren't. Back in 2004 when WoW launched, the previous MMOs were incredibly repetitive and incredibly grindy. They often entailed grouping up and then repeatedly killing the same group of mobs over and over as they respawned all night long in hopes of gaining not an entire level, but a few % of one level. In EverQuest, if you died, your gear was left on your corpse, and if you couldn't get your corpse, you couldn't get your gear back. Then WoW came along and kicked the MMO table over and allowed players to hit max level in under a month, something that seemed almost absurd to veteran MMO players at the time, myself included. If you got to max level in under a month, what were you gonna do after that? Until then, the point of many MMOs was trying to get to max level, and it took ages to do. The focus in WoW very much became about the end game content, getting players to max level sooner than later and getting them into the dungeons and raids that awaited them there, and that is still the case today. When looking at the current criticisms of WoW, it's hard to discern which criticisms are valid and which are the inevitable result of players not accepting that very few people are capable of playing one game for 17 years without getting bored of it. Is it Blizzard's fault for not releasing a successor, or is it the player's fault for thinking they can play any game for that long, or both? Regardless, the mere fact that so many players did play this game for 17 years proves that the game has done something special. Not a lot of games can say that, and almost no games have achieved the player numbers that WoW has. It features 12 unique classes, each with multiple specs. It is utterly massive. It handles scale in a way that almost no other MMO manages to do, and despite being almost 20 years old, it is one of the only MMOs that managed to create a seamless world with no load screens. You can literally get on your mount, see a mountain 4 zones away, and then fly there without a single load screen. World of Warcraft is as ambitious as they come, and it's still one of the biggest MMOs today. It features the holy trinity of tank, healer, and damage dealer, and if you somehow have never tried it, it's certainly worth giving it a spin if it looks interesting to you, even in 2022. And that is my list of the top 10 MMOs worth checking out in 2022. Were there any MMOs you felt should have made the list that didn't? Let me know down in the comments below. If you're still here, hopefully you enjoyed the video, so be sure to like and sub for more MMO content. My name is Lucky Ghost, and if you ever want to hang out with someone else who loves MMOs, be sure to swing by my Twitch channel over at twitch.tv/luckyghost. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.